Welcome to Revenge Report. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let's dive in. I stood in line with the other recruits, trying to make myself as invisible as possible. My hands were stiff at my sides, my face carefully blank, and I forced my gaze ahead, not allowing myself to flinch when I heard the sound of boots crunching on the gravel. Elena Voss! My father's voice rang out like a whip crack, sharp and unmistakable. My heart sank, but I didn't let it show. I'd known this moment would come, but hearing my name from his mouth still felt like a slap. The others in line shuffled their feet nervously. I didn't look at them, but I could feel their eyes on me. I wasn't just another recruit here today. I was a daughter being publicly humiliated by a man who never believed in me. I stepped forward, the gravel shifting under my boots, and stood at attention, facing my father, Chief Ranger Malcolm Voss, a man whose shadow stretched long over this camp, and whose disdain for me stretched even longer. He didn't even glance at the clipboard he held. His eyes were fixed on me, cold and calculating. "A failure," he sneered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Unfit for duty." A few of the recruits tensed. I felt their eyes darting between my father and me. There was no point in explaining, no point in defending myself. My father had already made his judgment, and the others were too afraid to speak up. "Last time we checked," he continued, his tone sharp like a blade, "you were chasing a career that went up in flames. What makes you think you belong here, Elena?" I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. I wasn't here for validation. I wasn't here to be a ranger for him. I was here for something else, something much more dangerous. Something I'd promised myself I'd uncover, no matter the cost. I scanned the faces of the younger trainees, most of them barely out of their teens. They didn't know who I was, who my father was, and they probably wouldn't care either. For them, this was just another training program, but for me, this was a front, an operation, a place to root out the corruption buried deep in the Academy's new Elite Ranger program. "Stay in line, Voss," my father barked again, his eyes narrowing, clearly waiting for me to break. I straightened my back, my voice calm, my tone practiced. "Of course, sir." For a moment, his gaze held mine, as if waiting for me to react. But I didn't, not this time. Not after everything. The roll call continued, and the rest of the recruits shuffled off to their tasks, their eyes still flicking to me in curiosity. I stayed where I was, a quiet observer among them, blending in with the group but never truly part of it. I was the outsider, the unwanted, the one who didn't belong, just like I'd always been in my father's eyes. I wasn't here for recognition. I wasn't here to play by his rules. I was here to uncover the truth, and no matter what it took, I would. The fire rescue simulation was the first real test of the training camp. It was grueling, designed to push the recruits past their limits. I wasn't worried about it, but the others, they were scared. I could see it in their eyes. Their bodies were stiff, unsure. They weren't prepared for what they were about to face. I didn't have the same fear, not anymore. We were split into teams, and I was paired with Ryder Hale, a cocky, aggressive recruit with something to prove. He shot me a glance as we were assigned to our area, sizing me up. I could tell from the way his lip curled that he didn't think I was capable of keeping up. I didn't care. I was here for a purpose, and he was just a minor inconvenience in my way. The simulation was chaotic, designed to mimic the frantic, unpredictable nature of a wildfire rescue. Our job was to reach a simulated victim as quickly as possible, using the most effective and efficient techniques. Ryder seemed to think he could bully his way through it, shouting orders, pushing me aside when we were setting up the ropes. "Come on, Voss," he snapped. "You're slowing us down." "Don't make me do everything." I remained silent, my hands steady as I secured the gear. Ryder was bigger, faster, and maybe even stronger, but I was smarter. As we reached the victim, I noticed the setup wasn't quite as it seemed. Some of the equipment wasn't properly maintained, and the victim was tied in a way that didn't make sense for the simulation. It felt wrong, but I kept my focus. Ryder kept barking orders, acting like the hero of the scene, but I could see the cracks, and I wasn't here for a show. It was then that I used the move I'd learned during my days with Ember Unit, the maneuver that had saved countless lives in real rescues. It was a quick, efficient method that bypassed traditional protocol, and it wasn't exactly approved by the Academy, but it worked. I twisted Ryder's arm out of the way, dropping him to the ground in a smooth, controlled motion. The other recruits froze in surprise. He looked up at me, wide-eyed, a mix of embarrassment and anger crossing his face. "You—" Before he could finish, I'd already secured the victim with the proper harness, ready to pull them to safety. But as Ryder stumbled to his feet, his grip on my sleeve tightened. He yanked me back, desperate to regain control of the situation. In the struggle, his hand brushed my sleeve, revealing the scar beneath, a small, faded mark. But it wasn't just any scar. It was the emblem of Ember Unit, the covert wildfire task force that had been disbanded after my mentor, Captain Rowan, was killed in a mission gone wrong. The scar wasn't something I'd ever shown anyone. It was a symbol of a past life, one I had buried, but here it was, exposed. Ryder's eyes locked onto it, and he froze. Director Hale, who had been overseeing the simulation, stepped forward at that moment. He caught sight of the scar, and his expression shifted. Without a word, he saluted me, a deep respect in his eyes. The recruits were silent, all of them staring at me, now aware that I was far more than I appeared. Ryder looked at me, mouth agape, his earlier cocky attitude wiped away. "My apologies, Voss," he muttered, his voice softer, almost respectful. But I didn't care for his apology. It wasn't about Ryder. It wasn't about the other recruits. It was about the truth coming to light, about them seeing the real me, the one my father had tried so hard to bury. Director Hale's gaze lingered on me for a moment longer, before he turned back to the group. "That maneuver was used by Ember Unit during a similar operation," he said, his voice low. "Anyone else here know what they're doing?" The recruits looked around at each other, unsure of how to respond. But they didn't need to know. They didn't need to know the secrets I carried with me. As I turned to leave, I caught my father's eye from across the yard. His expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something, regret perhaps, before he masked it again. The others were still watching me, the weight of the revelation sinking in. But I was done pretending. They had seen what I was capable of now, and I wasn't about to hide it anymore. I wasn't just a failure. I was the last living member of Ember Unit, and I was here for a reason. Later that night, after the simulation, I couldn't sleep. The events of the day kept replaying in my mind. The moment the scar had been exposed, the shock in Ryder's eyes, the silent recognition from Director Hale. The secret was out, and I couldn't take it back. I had been Ember Unit's survivor, the one left behind after a mission that went horribly wrong. That scar on my arm wasn't just a reminder of the past, it was a symbol of everything I had lost. My team, my mentor. A future that had been ripped away from me. 5 years ago, Captain Rowan had died protecting me. I'd been the only one to make it out of that wildfire disaster, but not without losing everything that mattered. Back then, I'd been a part of something bigger than myself. Ember Unit had been a covert task force that operated in extreme, unreported wildfire zones. Our job was to contain the fires no one else could handle, the ones that grew too dangerous or too close to populated areas. It was dangerous work, life-threatening even, and most of the time, we were completely off the books. There was no public record, no medals, no recognition. It was just us, battling nature's fury, and then there was the sabotage. I didn't realize it at the time, but I should have. The signs had been there all along. Someone from within the department, someone high up, was feeding false intelligence. The operations we were sent on were not all natural disasters. We were being set up, manipulated, sent to die for reasons that had nothing to do with protecting the public. I had started to piece things together slowly, but by the time I did, it was too late. Ember Unit was gone, disbanded, and I was declared dead, another casualty in a war no one had heard about. The rumors were starting to spread again, whispers about corrupt dealings within the academy, about the elite program that had been designed under the guise of high-risk training. That's why I'd enlisted as a recruit, using my father's disdain as a shield. No one would suspect me of being more than I seemed, but now everything was starting to unravel. I grabbed my notebook from my bag, flipping through the pages where I had written down every detail of what had happened to Ember Unit. Rowan's final words to me still echoed in my mind. Don't let them bury us. The academy, the new program, it was all connected to the same system that had killed Rowan, and that had erased my past. But it wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. I couldn't just sit back and watch the corruption continue. It was time to dig deeper. I made my way to the mess hall early the next morning. I needed to get the lay of the land, see who I could trust, and figure out who else in the camp might be connected to the system I was trying to expose. As I stepped into the cafeteria, I noticed a few familiar faces among the recruits. Ryder, still keeping his distance, and Mira Quinn, a quiet but sharp-eyed trainee who had been unusually observant during the simulation. She wasn't like the others. While the rest of the recruits gossiped and whispered about the new legend in their midst, Mira stayed focused, always watching, always thinking. I made my way to an empty table, trying to blend in. As I sat down, I noticed Mira walking in, scanning the room as she always did. Her eyes landed on me for a split second before quickly darting away. I didn't know if she was interested or suspicious, but one thing was clear. She wasn't just another eager trainee. It wasn't long before she moved toward me, hesitantly pulling up a chair. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, her voice low but steady. I nodded, offering her a brief smile. "Go ahead." She sat down, glancing around the room before speaking again, this time quieter. "You're different. I can tell." I raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" She tilted her head, her gaze sharp. "You're not like the others here. I know you've got your reasons for being here, but what are you really looking for?" The question caught me off guard. She was smart, sharper than I had expected, and she knew something wasn't right. I glanced at her for a long moment. "The same thing you are," I said quietly. "Truth." Her eyes narrowed just slightly, but then she nodded, as if she understood exactly what I meant. "I've been hearing things, whispers about how this place runs. Things don't add up. You don't just end up here without being part of something bigger." I couldn't help but smile at her perceptiveness. "Exactly. And I'm here to find out just how deep it goes." Mira leaned in, her voice barely a whisper. "Then you should be careful. There are people here who won't let you uncover anything. You don't know who's watching." I met her gaze, wondering just how much she knew. "So, you're not just another recruit, are you?" Her lips curled into a small smile, the first hint of warmth I had seen from her. "Number, I'm not." Training had only been a few days, but I could already tell something was wrong. It wasn't the grueling physical exercises, the intense simulations, or even the pressure of competing against the other recruits. It was the little things, the subtle discrepancies, the mistakes that didn't add up, equipment that should have been properly checked, malfunctioning during drills. I was placed in Unit Bravo, the team of failures, the ones whose performance so far had been underwhelming, who had been relegated to using outdated rescue gear and subpar equipment. The rigged tests were already beginning, and I could feel it deep in my bones. Ryder Hale, of course, was a part of Bravo. His smug attitude hadn't changed. He was too eager to prove himself, desperate to show off in front of the others. Every drill, every challenge, he pushed himself harder and harder, always trying to outshine the rest of the team. But I didn't need to outshine anyone. I just needed to survive, to gather the information I needed. My real goal wasn't winning or proving myself to my father, it was exposing the corruption beneath the surface. We were given a rope launch drill that day. It sounded simple enough. Use the rope to launch a rescue pack to a mock victim in a tree. It wasn't supposed to be difficult. The equipment, however, told a different story. As I checked my gear, I could already see it. The harness looked worn, the ropes were frayed, and there was a snag in the line where it could get caught during the launch. I glanced at the other recruits. They were too focused on their own gear to notice. Ryder's turn came up first, naturally. He sauntered to the launch point with a cocky smile, practically brimming with arrogance. I could hear him muttering under his breath, probably sizing up the other recruits to see who would be impressed by his performance. "Watch this," he said, looking directly at me. He launched the rope, and the line caught. It didn't just get stuck, it snapped. The pack fell to the ground with a heavy thud, and Ryder swore under his breath. "I knew it was the damn gear," he muttered, kicking the rope in frustration. Sergeant Maddox, the instructor overseeing the drill, shot him a glare. "Get it together, Hale. You've got one more shot. If you mess up again, we'll move on." I didn't need to wait for him to fail again. I could already see the fault lines. This wasn't a simple mistake. The equipment had been deliberately tampered with to make sure Bravo's members failed. This was sabotage. Ryder gave it another shot, and this time, the rope launched without issue. But it didn't take long for me to realize. This wasn't just about the drills. It was about making sure certain people failed, making sure we didn't succeed. It was my turn next. I stepped up, my mind focused. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone, but I also couldn't let the failure slide. I inspected the gear carefully, adjusting the harness and checking the rope for any other signs of wear. There were still flaws in the system, but I could work around them. I knew how to adapt. I took my position at the launch point, my movements deliberate, my focus unshakable. The pack launched smoothly, soaring toward the target. The rest of the recruits were silent, watching, and I felt their gazes on me. But I didn't care. The rope was secure. The pack landed right on target. I barely took a breath before walking back toward the group, feeling the heat of their stares, but it didn't matter. It wasn't my job to win the admiration of these trainees. It was my job to learn everything I could about what was happening behind the scenes. Sergeant Maddox gave a curt nod. Nice job, Voss. Now, let's move on. I glanced over at Ryder, his face red from embarrassment. He was still grumbling about the faulty gear, but I could tell he was beginning to piece things together. He wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed, but even he could recognize sabotage when it was in front of him. As the drills continued, I watched the others with a critical eye. They were too focused on the tests themselves to notice the inconsistencies. But I had learned how to read the room, how to spot the small signs of manipulation. I had to be careful. Later that night, as we gathered in the barracks, I overheard the whispers. It wasn't just Ryder. There were others who were beginning to question the Academy's methods. The rumor mill churned, and I caught a few names being thrown around. Trainees who had been slipping by despite their mediocre performances. Coded messages were exchanged, and I began to hear murmurs about Rowan, Captain Rowan's name, my mentor. The man who had died trying to protect me, the one who had been erased. I felt the anger rising in my chest, but I kept it contained. The whispers were more than I'd expected, and they only confirmed what I suspected. Someone was reviving Rowan's teachings in secret, and they were doing it to subvert the system, to continue whatever dark agenda had killed him in the first place. I knew now. The stakes were much higher than I had imagined. This wasn't just about corrupt officials or sabotage. This was about unfinished business, and I wasn't leaving until I uncovered the truth. The next few days blurred together in a haze of sabotage and grueling tests. The drills kept coming, and so did the failures, our failures. The Academy's tactics became clearer with each passing hour. Unit Bravo was never meant to succeed. Our equipment was subpar, our training courses designed to make us fall short, to make us doubt ourselves. But I couldn't afford to fall into that trap. I had to stay sharp. It was on the fourth day, as I walked past the supply depot on my way back to the barracks, that I saw her. Mira Quinn, the sharp-eyed recruit from earlier, was sitting behind the building, her back pressed against the cold brick wall, her face hidden in her hands. She was crying. It took me by surprise. Mira had always kept to herself, maintaining an air of quiet strength. She wasn't the kind of person you'd expect to find in a moment of vulnerability, but there she was, hidden from the eyes of the other recruits, her shoulders trembling. I hesitated for a second, then walked over, careful not to startle her. "Mira?" I said gently. "Are you okay?" She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. She quickly wiped her face with the back of her hand, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm fine. Just tired." "Can I sit?" I asked, already lowering myself beside her before she had a chance to answer. She nodded but didn't say anything, her gaze drifting to the ground. I knew she was trying to hide whatever pain she was going through, but it wasn't the time for that. We didn't have time for secrets in a place like this. I waited for a moment, letting the silence hang between us before speaking again. "You're not the first one to crack under the pressure here. If you need to talk about it." She let out a long, shaky breath. "I reported something. I reported an instructor who's been giving special treatment to one of the other trainees. His favoritism is obvious, and when I confronted him, he turned it on me. Now I'm being punished for it. My performance score's been downgraded, and everyone knows about it. It's not fair." I could hear the frustration in her voice, the rawness that she wasn't willing to show to anyone else. It was a fight I recognized, the feeling of being pushed down by a system that was rigged to fail you, no matter how hard you tried. "I'm sorry," I said softly, "but you did the right thing. They can't punish you for that. You're doing the right thing." She gave me a dry, bitter laugh. "That's easy for you to say. You're not the one being targeted." "I am," I replied quietly. "Maybe not in the same way, but I'm being targeted too. This academy is built to break people. They don't want us to succeed, but we can't let them win." She looked up at me, studying my face, as if weighing my words. Then she sighed, her shoulders sagging. "What if it's all just too much? What if they've already won?" "They haven't won yet," I said firmly. "Not if we keep fighting back." For a long moment, neither of us spoke, but I could feel the shift in the air, like something important had just clicked into place. Mira wasn't just a victim of the system, she was a fighter, and I wasn't alone in this anymore. Finally, she spoke again, her voice quieter now, but with a newfound sense of resolve. I've been trying to figure out who I can trust here. I don't know who's on our side, who's playing the game, but I know you're not like the others. I nodded. I'm not here to play the game. I'm here to expose it. We don't have to do this alone. Her eyes flickered with something. Hope, maybe, or determination. How do we start? I took a deep breath, my mind already racing through the possibilities. The Academy's corruption ran deep, and it wasn't just about the instructors. There were people here with power, with connections, who were protecting something much darker than I had imagined. But now I had an ally, a partner. We start by keeping our eyes open, I said. We start by gathering evidence. And when we have enough, we go straight to the top. We expose everything. Mira nodded, her jaw set. I'm with you. And just like that, it wasn't just me anymore. I had someone on my side, someone who understood the stakes, someone who wasn't afraid to fight for what was right. The days after I spoke with Mira felt different. There was a subtle shift in the air, a quiet bond between us that hadn't been there before. She wasn't just a trainee anymore. She was a partner, someone I could rely on to help uncover the truth about what was happening within the Academy. But despite my growing sense of purpose, the unease gnawed at me. There were whispers, always whispers. And even as I carefully gathered the pieces of the puzzle, I knew the system here was far more entrenched than I'd anticipated. I spent the following weeks keeping a low profile, waiting for an opportunity to move deeper into the Academy's operations. It wasn't easy, though. My father's watchful eyes were everywhere, and the higher-ups made sure to keep the pressure on. Every mistake, every slip-up was noticed. Every challenge was a chance to humiliate someone. But something was happening that I couldn't ignore. There were too many coded messages, too many cryptic notes slipped into the hands of certain recruits. I had to get to the heart of it, whatever it was. One evening, after lights out, I slipped out of the barracks, my heart thudding in my chest. Mira had warned me about being too obvious, but I needed answers. I couldn't afford to wait any longer. The security guards were making their rounds, but I knew the route well enough by now. I'd studied the patrol patterns, learned which corridors were usually empty at night. My destination? The director's office. The building was quiet, the only sound the creaking of the floorboards under my boots. I made my way past the training rooms, then down the narrow hall to the office wing. The director's office was tucked away in the far corner of the building, and as far as I knew, it had never been unlocked during the night. I reached the door, the small metal plate reading Director Hale gleaming dimly in the moonlight from the hallway windows. I didn't have the key, but I had something else. A small set of lock-picking tools I'd swiped from the Academy's supply closet earlier in the day. A few seconds later, the lock clicked open, and the door creaked slightly as it swung inward. I paused, listening for any sound. Silence. I stepped inside, immediately hit by the stale air, the smell of old paper and leather. The office was nothing special. Large desk, a few chairs, a stack of documents on the desk, but there was a certain coldness to it, a sense of control that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I moved quickly, keeping to the shadows. The desk drawers were my first stop. I yanked open the top one, rifling through the files. Most of it was mundane. Logs of recruit attendance, training schedules, policy updates. But there was one folder that stood out. It was tucked away in the back, labeled with a thick black marker. Ember Unit. Final report. My stomach dropped. Ember Unit. My team. The mission that had cost me everything. I hesitated for a split second before grabbing the folder and opening it. My hands were steady, but my heart was racing as I flipped through the pages. The report detailed the last mission we'd gone on, the one that ended with Rowan dead and me being marked as a casualty. It wasn't just an account of the mission, though. The report outlined the chain of events, the sabotage that had occurred during our operation. There were discrepancies in the intelligence we'd received. Documents pointed to someone within the department having deliberately misled Ember Unit, intentionally setting us up to fail. But it didn't stop there. The last few pages were filled with more recent notes, handwritten in a different hand than the rest of the report. Names, dates, equipment orders for new training programs that didn't make sense. And then one line that made my blood run cold. Reactivation of Ember Unit protocols. Need to ensure Voss is out of the picture before proceeding. I read the words over and over, trying to piece them together. Someone within the Academy had been working behind the scenes to bring Ember Unit back, reviving the same corrupt tactics that had gotten my team killed. I couldn't breathe. The walls were closing in. This wasn't just about training recruits or some rogue operation. This was bigger. Someone wanted to bring Ember Unit back, but for what purpose? Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway outside. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't have much time. I shoved the folder back into the drawer, the papers rustling loudly in the silence. Just as I started to turn toward the door, a voice called out from behind me. "What are you doing here?" My blood ran cold. It was Director Hale. I spun around quickly, my mind racing for an excuse. But before I could say anything, Hale stepped into the room, his gaze dark and unreadable. "I knew you'd find it eventually," he said, his tone low, almost amused. "You always were a good investigator. Too bad you're in the wrong place, Elena." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. I don't know what you're talking about." Hale took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. "Don't lie to me. You came here looking for something, didn't you? I can't let you keep digging, Elena. You've already uncovered more than you should have." My pulse raced. I was trapped. The door was behind me, but I couldn't outrun him, not with everything I'd just discovered. "You won't get away with this," I said, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts to stay calm. Director Hale smiled, a cold, dangerous smile. "I think you'll find that I already have." I didn't move. The room felt suffocating, the walls closing in on me as Hale's cold eyes bore into mine. I could feel the weight of everything I had uncovered pressing down on me, but I refused to back down. "I don't think you fully understand what you've stumbled into," Hale said, his voice smooth, like he was lecturing a student. "This isn't about your little vendetta against the Academy. This is bigger. Much bigger." I stood my ground, my breath slow and measured. I could hear my father's voice in my head, his judgment ringing in my ears. "You're not cut out for this, Elena. You don't have what it takes." But that wasn't true. I had what it took. And I wasn't going to let him or Hale intimidate me. "I don't care how big it is," I replied, my voice firm. "What matters is the truth. You've been running this program under false pretenses, using recruits as pawns in a game they don't even know they're playing." Hale's smile didn't falter. "I'm not here to argue with you, Elena. I'm here to make sure you understand the consequences of your actions." He stepped closer, the air between us thick with tension. "You think you can just waltz in here, uncover a few truths, and walk away unscathed? This isn't just about you anymore. You're messing with things you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I shot back, stepping forward, my chest tight with the pressure of everything I had seen and heard. "I understand that Ember Unit was sabotaged by people in your position, people who wanted to cover up their tracks. I understand that you're trying to revive it to continue the same corrupt practices. I'm not going to let you get away with it." Hale's expression shifted ever so slightly. There was a flicker of something, annoyance, maybe, or perhaps even fear. But it was gone just as quickly. He took another step closer. "You think you can stop me? You think you're the only one with secrets in this place?" My heart skipped a beat. What was he trying to say? Suddenly the door opened behind us, and Mira stepped into the room, her eyes wide, but determination etched across her face. She'd followed me, no doubt sensing something wasn't right. "Director Hale," she said calmly, her voice steady but sharp. "I think you should let Elena go." Hale's eyes flicked to her, and for the first time, I saw something approaching genuine surprise on his face. "You think you can stop me too, Mira?" She didn't flinch. "I don't need to stop you. I just need you to know that you're not the only one here who's been paying attention." There was a long, tense silence as Hale regarded both of us. Then slowly, he shook his head, a dangerous smile creeping back onto his lips. "You think you can take down everything I've built? You think you can expose me? The Academy has already made its decision. There's no going back from this." I didn't back down. "Then I guess we'll see who comes out on top." For a moment, it felt like the entire world hung in the balance. Hale stood there, his eyes cold, calculating. He was weighing our words, deciding what to do next. But I knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let this go easily. Then, unexpectedly, Hale took a step back and chuckled softly. "I'm impressed, Elena. And Mira, you're not as naive as I thought, but I'm afraid you're out of your depth." Mira and I exchanged a quick glance. It wasn't over yet. "You're still a pawn in my game," Hale said, his voice low and full of venom. "The system will break you, just like it breaks everyone else who thinks they can take it on. You can't win this fight. You'll only lose. And you'll bring everyone down with you." Before I could say anything else, Hale turned sharply, walking toward the door. He paused just before stepping out, his back to us. "You have your secrets, Elena," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight of finality. But I have mine, and I'm not afraid to use them. The door slammed shut behind him, and Mira and I were left standing in the office, the silence thick and oppressive. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. That was close. Mira's face was set in a hard line, her eyes narrowed. We're not done, not by a long shot. He's dangerous, Elena. You know that, right? I nodded, my mind racing. I knew exactly how dangerous Hale was. But it wasn't over yet. We still had work to do. We're not backing down, I said, my voice steely. This fight is just getting started. Mira gave a small, grim smile. Then let's get to work. We weren't just up against Hale. We weren't just up against the Academy. We were up against an entire system, a network of corruption that had been built over years. But we had something they didn't, each other, and together we were going to take them down. The Academy was different now, suffused with an air of tension that clung to every hallway. The subtle manipulations, the small sabotages, everything had been laid bare, and the truth was no longer just a whisper in the dark. It was out in the open, undeniable. Hale and the higher-ups had underestimated the resistance that Mira and I had begun to build. But the clock was ticking, and I knew I couldn't stay at the Academy much longer. The walls were closing in, and my role here was nearing its end. I met with Mira in the small corner of the mess hall that had become our unofficial meeting spot. She was always calm, her face unreadable, but there was a flicker of something new in her eyes now. Hope. We've got enough, I said, sliding a folder across the table to her. Inside were the copies of everything I had gathered from Hale's office. The documents about Ember Unit, the corrupted reports, and the hidden agendas that had been driving this whole operation. It was all in there. The pieces of the puzzle were finally fitting together. Mira looked over the files carefully. This is it, isn't it? She said softly. The final nail in their coffin. I nodded, watching her closely. She had become more than just an ally. She was a partner in this fight. It wasn't just about exposing the truth anymore. It was about dismantling the system Hale and the others had so carefully built. I can't stay here any longer, I said, feeling the weight of the words as they left my mouth. It wasn't just the corruption or the lies anymore, it was the danger. We'd done enough damage already, and Hale was getting closer to realizing that I was more than just a recruit. We've done all we can. Mira met my gaze, her expression unreadable for a moment. You're leaving? I have to. You know it's too dangerous now. They'll come after me if I stay, and I won't let them use me as a pawn anymore. This is bigger than us. She paused, letting the silence fill the space between us. What happens now? I stood up slowly, glancing around the room one last time. The other recruits went about their business, oblivious to what was unfolding. Hale thought he had the upper hand, that he had control of everything. But he was wrong. We were the ones with the truth, and we had the power to change everything. I'm done being a part of their game, I said quietly. I'll keep fighting, but it won't be from here. I'm going to take this somewhere where it matters. The truth will come out. It has to. Mira gave a nod, a small but knowing smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. And I'll help you. You're not in this alone, Elena. We'll make sure they answer for what they've done. I couldn't help but smile. Mira was right. I wasn't alone. Not anymore. Later that day, I packed up my things. The small room I had stayed in at the Academy felt suddenly suffocating. Every inch of the space reminded me of everything I had put aside to get this far. The long nights of research, the quiet sacrifices I had made. When I walked out the door, it felt final. It was time to leave the Academy behind and finish what I had started. The corruption, the lies, the manipulation, none of it would go unchallenged. I had lost so much, but I wasn't going to let them take any more from me. As I stood outside, the sun beginning to set behind the Academy walls, I felt the weight of everything lift. There was no more playing by their rules, no more hiding who I was or what I stood for. The fight wasn't over, it was just beginning. I glanced over at Mira, who had followed me outside. She had her own life to rebuild, her own path to follow, but we both knew this wasn't just about us anymore. This was about everyone the Academy had ever wronged, everyone who had been used as a pawn in their twisted game. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the final document, a declassification scroll signed by Director Hale himself. It was my final move, the last piece of the puzzle. With a deep breath, I slid it into the envelope and handed it to Mira. Make sure this gets to the right people, I said. It's time they heard the truth. She nodded, taking the envelope with a quiet determination. They won't get away with it. As I turned to walk away, I felt the heavy weight of everything I had lost. Rowan, Ember Unit, the life I once had. But I also felt something else, the spark of something new. A future that wasn't tied to this place, to this system, to my father's shadow. It was my time to create something different. I took one last look at the academy, the place where everything had changed, and walked away. It didn't take long for the fallout from my departure to reach its peak. The academy had already started to feel like a distant memory, a chapter of my life that had ended. But even as I walked away from it, the weight of what I had uncovered, the truth about Ember Unit, the academy's corruption, and the twisted motivations behind it all, still hung heavily in my mind. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. I knew I couldn't just disappear. I had to find a way to continue the work I had started, uncovering the truth and exposing the people responsible for the deaths of my team and the manipulation of innocent recruits. I had already contacted a few of the higher-ups I knew who could help make the truth public. And though I was determined to get everything out there, I had one more thing to do. One more thing that mattered more than anything else. I needed to rebuild. I couldn't do it alone. And I wasn't going to try. A week after leaving the academy, I found myself in a small, unassuming town on the outskirts of the state. It was a quiet place, tucked away in the mountains, where the noise of the outside world couldn't reach. A perfect spot to start something new. I had rented a small building, one that used to be a rundown warehouse. Now it was going to be something else entirely. I had big plans for it, plans that stretched beyond anything I had done before. This was no longer about exposing corruption or uncovering hidden agendas. It was about creating something lasting, something real. I wasn't going to fight the system from the shadows anymore. I was going to build a foundation that would help those the system had failed, the overlooked, the underestimated, the people who didn't have the chance to succeed because of the walls others built for them. I set to work right away. The space was empty, barren, but the potential was undeniable. The walls were a little cracked, the floors worn down from years of neglect. But that was just another challenge to overcome. I like challenges. I thrived in them. It took weeks of planning and hard work, but bit by bit, I turned the building into something else, something that felt right. I started gathering the right people, people like Mira. She had agreed to help me, and together we began to craft something that had never been done before, an unofficial training collective for recruits who didn't fit the mold of the academy's elite. I posted small, anonymous flyers around the area, and word of mouth spread quickly. Women, veterans, immigrants, people who had been pushed aside by the system, overlooked by the academy, but who had the potential to be the best. Soon enough, the first group arrived. They were skeptical at first, unsure of what they were walking into, but they came. And with each new person, the collective grew stronger. We trained in silence, focusing on the things that really mattered: resilience, precision, and quiet strength. Not the kind of strength the academy valued, but the kind of strength that came from knowing who you were and standing your ground no matter what. Mira helped lead the sessions, teaching recruits the basics of fire safety, survival techniques, and first aid, skills that went beyond the basic training offered by the academy. We taught them how to trust their instincts, how to adapt to situations no one could predict. We gave them the tools they needed to succeed, to survive, and to thrive. And I stayed behind the scenes, quietly organizing, making sure everything ran smoothly, always watching for the next recruit who might need help. A few months later, the collective was no longer just a small group in the middle of nowhere. It was starting to grow. Word had spread, and recruits came from all corners, some from places like the academy, others from areas even further off the grid. They were all looking for something more than the traditional system could give them. They were looking for something real. I still spent most of my days working on documents, gathering evidence, preparing the final report to expose the academy's corruption, and getting the truth out into the open. But now, I had a different kind of satisfaction. I wasn't just exposing the lies anymore. I was giving these recruits the chance to write their own stories, to rewrite their own names in ink. It wasn't about the academy. It wasn't about fighting my father's legacy. It was about building a new foundation, a place where the next generation of forest rangers, of people who had been overlooked, underestimated, and cast aside, could come together and forge their own paths. One day, as I stood at the front of the small training area, watching Mira work with a new group of recruits, I realized that this was where I was supposed to be. This was my new mission. I looked over at Mira, who caught my gaze and smiled. She was teaching the next generation of leaders, people who would understand what it meant to work hard, to fight back against a system that didn't value them, to rise above the expectations others had set for them. And as the recruits worked through their drills, I made a vow to myself, a vow to keep fighting, to keep helping, and to never forget why I started this journey in the first place, to create a future for the ones who had been discarded, just like I had. Write your own name in ink, I whispered to myself, watching the recruits move through their drills. No one else has that right.